Humans do not live forever, and as we go through life, we are forced to part with someone we love. A funeral visit is a way of comforting both the person who has passed away and the people who have been left behind. In the world of the living, this may be seen as a natural duty and a basic courtesy. But today, there is another factor we need to think about: the place we visit. In other words, the place where a funeral is held is also a place where the invisible world and the human world come face to face. This story begins right at that point. In folk belief, it was believed that beings who had not long been dead or unclean energy could still remain in such places. People believed that this energy or presence could enter a living person and cause negative influence or even serious harm. This was not seen as a simple matter of mood. It was believed to be a phenomenon that could actually affect a person's life. What the people of the past feared was that this influence often began when a person was weakened or when their luck had already turned downward. They believed it could begin when that person visited places where the energy of death still remained heavily, such as a funeral hall or the site of an accident, and became connected to the impurity of that place. So this was not the name of one single ghost. It was an energy that clung to a person from a place where death had passed. And at times, it was understood as a fear connected to resentment or emotions left behind. Something that could break down the body of the living and even disturb the household around them. And the more frightening part is that it does not reveal itself right there on the spot. Nothing happened at the funeral hall. The visit was completed, the greetings were exchanged, a meal was eaten, and then the person left. The problem begins after returning home. It is not simply a brief chill in the body. From that day on, the atmosphere of the home changes. The person changes. The flow of life changes. Some people suddenly collapse physically. Some people have the same dream every night. In some households, small arguments begin, and strangely enough, bad things keep happening one after another. That is why people in the past tried to remember where it all began and tried to find the cause. It started after I came back from that funeral hall. Today, we will follow this old folk horror and look at what this phenomenon was believed to be, which people were told to be more careful. What signs made people suspect that the influence had begun, and why people could not feel safe with only salt, water, or simple purification at the doorway, and instead searched for stronger methods. A place where a funeral is held was not simply a place of sadness. To the people of the past, it was a place where the boundary between the living and the dead became thinnest. There was crying. There was lingering regret. There was resentment circling in the air. It was a place where the energy of a final breath had not yet fully settled. That is why people believed that at a funeral, it was not only the deceased who was present. Other things could also gather, following the energy of death. Wandering presences. Spirits bound by emotions left behind. Unexplained negative energies that stayed in that place. Of course, not everyone believed this in exactly the same way. Some called it energy. Some called it a ghost. Some simply called it an ominous current that could not be explained. But the important common point was this: when those invisible things became connected to a living person, the flow of that person's life could change. The reason this phenomenon is frightening is not because of stories about seeing something. It is because there are more stories about people falling apart for no clear reason. This influence after a funeral visit was believed to be something that could happen to anyone. It was not a story limited to a certain kind of person. Because in every life, there are times when one's energy becomes weak. There are times when one's luck turns downward. And there are moments when openings appear in the mind and body. At such times, if a person comes into contact with a place where the energy of death is strong, people believed that an invisible negative influence could enter through that opening. For example, it could be a situation like this. Recently, your body and mind were exhausted. You had not been sleeping well. Worries had been piling up inside your family. You had always been physically weak. You were feeling sensitive because an important life decision was coming up. Recently, you had the feeling that your luck kept going wrong. If, in such a state, a person spent a long time coming and going from a funeral hall, the site of an accident, or a place where death had occurred, then even an energy that would normally pass by could remain in the body. In other words, this phenomenon was not seen as a disaster that appears out of nowhere. It was closer to a connection formed when a weakened person and a place of death came into contact. That is why anyone had to be careful. Even a perfectly healthy person was believed to have an opening when their luck turned downward. What kind of signs did people see as the beginning of a negative energy and influence that had followed them from a funeral hall? This part is important. This influence was not described as simply saying, "I have been a little tired lately." When people truly suspected that a negative energy had followed them from a funeral hall, they believed that several signs would overlap at once, or appear one after another in a strange way. The first thing to come was the collapse of the body. This was not ordinary fatigue. Within a day or two after returning from a funeral hall, a fever would suddenly rise, and the person would fall ill as if they had severe body aches. The whole body would ache. The shoulders, the back, and the back of the neck would feel especially heavy, as if they were being pressed down. The person would lose all energy and not even want to get up. Even after eating, strength would not return. It was said that medicine worked slowly, and even after going to the hospital, there were cases where no clear cause could be found. But it was not only a matter of the body. When people suspected that negative energy from a funeral hall was still lingering, the night changed. Sleep paralysis became frequent. Dreams became excessively vivid. A person wearing black. A hallway that looked like one seen at the funeral hall. A figure standing in front of the door. A sound like someone calling your name. Waking up repeatedly at strangely similar times during the night. During the day, everything may seem fine, but once night comes, suddenly, breathing becomes difficult. The room feels unfamiliar, and a heavy pressure comes over you, as if someone else is there with you. When these symptoms repeated, the people of the past did not suspect simple fatigue or stress. They suspected that energy from a place of death had begun to affect the person's life, and the more frightening signs appeared beyond the body and beyond dreams. They appeared as changes in the flow of life itself. Family members who rarely argued begin clashing again and again over insignificant words. Dishes break inside the house. Small and large accidents increase. When driving, strangely dangerous situations happen more often than usual. Money problems become tangled. Appointments fall through. Plans keep falling apart. Small misfortunes continue, as if they are rushing in one after another. And if the beginning of all this was after visiting a funeral hall, people did not see it as mere coincidence. That is why this influence was frightening. Because people believed it did not only make one person's body sick, it could also affect the loved ones and the life surrounding that person. In severe cases, people even spoke of situations where misfortune continued one after another. After one person held a funeral, if another death occurred in the family not long afterward, or if, around the same time, someone who had been healthy suffered a serious illness, a major incident, or an accident, the people of the past believed that the influence had grown deeper. In such cases, they would sometimes warn people not to visit places related to funerals or death anymore. Why did people not believe that everyone faced the same danger? At this point, we may have this question: who needed to be more careful about funeral visits or funeral halls? Even after going to the same funeral hall, why is one person fine, while another person is especially shaken by its influence? People in the past explained this difference through the energy a person carries, and through the invisible openings that can appear during certain periods of life. Funeral directors, or those whose work is related to funerals, are constantly exposed to this kind of environment. Then why do they not always have problems? Some people say this: those who deal closely with funerals and the procedures of death are people who have been given a calling by the divine, a profession they are meant to endure. Because working constantly at the boundary between life and death is not something just anyone can do. Then who should be more careful to avoid the negative energy and influence that follows from places of death? People who are physically weak to begin with. People who are severely exhausted. People who have been pressed down by depression or anxiety for a long time. People who are sensitive because they are facing an important event. People who feel that their luck has turned downward because things have kept going wrong one after another. People in such states were believed to be more easily affected than others by energy clinging to them from a place of death. That is why there were certain people who were told to be especially careful. Pregnant women. A body carrying new life was believed to be something that should be kept as far away as possible from the energy of death. Homes with newborn babies. The energy of a life that has just entered this world was seen as weak and delicate. So people believed that the heavy energy clinging from a funeral hall should not be brought into that home. Next were the sick. A sick person was already considered to have weakened energy. So people believed that the impure energy remaining in a place of death could settle on them more easily. And it was not only about the person themselves. If there was a sick person at home, people were told to reconsider going to a funeral visit. And then there were people who were about to face a major celebration or important new beginning. Marriage, a baby's first birthday, moving into a new home, opening a business, an exam, an important contract, at a decisive time in life, or before a beginning that should be bright. People believed it was better not to come close to the cold energy of death. In other words, the core of this taboo was not that people avoided it because they were afraid, nor was it because they lacked courtesy. It was because people believed that even by chance, a bad situation could arise through an invisible presence or an energy following from a place of death. So the living tried to protect their present lives. That is why people who knew these old taboos would have seriously thought about who should go in person, who should only send their condolences, and who should first cleanse the body after returning. There is something here that you must not misunderstand. This does not mean that you should never attend a funeral visit or go to a funeral hall. As long as we live in society, and as long as we live together with other people, it is impossible to never go to a funeral hall. When a close relative or the family member of someone you know passes away, going there to offer comfort and share in their grief is a natural duty as a human being. And sometimes there are situations where you simply have no choice but to go. However, the problem is that in that place, there may not only be the people you need to meet and comfort, because it is a place where many presences that should not be met, and much energy remaining from a place of death can gather. The meaning is to be careful and prepare in advance. Because we are living beings, and because both we and our families have value in maintaining a better life. Then, if we must go to a funeral hall, what are some simple ways to protect ourselves before going? Methods of prevention vary greatly depending on religion, shamanic practice, and folk tradition. So I cannot say that only one method is the correct answer, or that everyone must do it this way. Sometimes, when you receive a fortune reading from a shaman or a spiritual medium, you may hear things like, from this date to that date, you must absolutely not go to a funeral hall. The first method of prevention is this: if your luck and energy are not good, or if you are in a period when negative energy can easily attach to you, then it is better to avoid funeral visits whenever possible. Whether that is true or not, if something is said to be unfavorable, there is no need to force yourself to do it. But if it is your family, or if there is a funeral hall you absolutely must visit, then before going, you prepare yourself with whatever protective method you know. I use a method that was advised to me by a close spiritual medium. I place coarse sea salt in a plastic bag or a piece of paper, in an amount matched to the number of my age, and then visit the funeral hall. Some people usually place a talisman behind their necktie or inside their pants pocket before going. Some people carry a small pouch with salt, red pepper powder, or red beans. Some carry a prayer bead bracelet, a rosary, a cross, or another symbol connected to their faith. Others, before entering the funeral hall, say a short prayer or draw a boundary in their mind before they go in. Depending on the household, people may follow various protective customs, such as not staying too long or brushing off their hands when entering and when leaving. Especially when visiting a funeral hall, there are things to be careful about. Unless you are immediate family, it is said to be better not to witness the washing of the deceased, the dressing of the body in burial clothes, the binding of the body, or the process of placing the body into the coffin. From both a traditional and shamanic viewpoint, it was believed that many cases of deeper influence from negative energy following from a place of death happened to people who witnessed these processes. However, I cannot say that these precautions before and after a visit are an all-powerful protection that can prevent even the worst situations. Nor can I say that they are the only correct answer. Now, let us talk about what people did after returning. After coming back from a funeral hall, why did people not go straight into their homes? Here, purification and recovery from any possible energy were considered important. The people of the past also used methods that could realistically be practiced in daily life. And even today, many people still continue these actions naturally, almost like a habit. The most common method is not going directly home. People stop by a convenience store or a restaurant for a moment, or they briefly pass through a place where many people are gathered. They buy a drink somewhere with bright lights. Even inside the car, they do not go straight into the house. They get some fresh air and allow some time to pass. Why did they do this? Even if the visit was made with good intentions, the invisible world is difficult to predict. These actions carried a defensive intention. They were meant to cut off any possible presence of death or energy that had followed from a place of death, so that it would not bring negative influence to the person or their family. The energy of death was believed to be quiet, damp, and sunken. So when people wanted to cut off the heavy energy that had clung to them from a funeral hall, they tried to pass through a place filled instead with the energy of living people. A convenience store, a brightly lit shop, a street where people come and go, a bright and ordinary place. People believed that the warmth and noise of such places could scatter the heavy energy that had attached itself at the funeral hall. Some people also went to a public bathhouse or sauna, heated their bodies, washed themselves, and then returned home. If that was not possible, they would come home and take a long shower, wash their hair, and wash the clothes they had worn to the funeral hall. This, too, was not simply hygiene. It carried the meaning of purification. Before entering the home, some people sprinkled the salt, red pepper powder, or red beans they had carried with them at the doorway. Some washed their hands and face first, before going inside. This was all part of the same idea. In folk belief, running water and salt were symbols of washing away impurity and establishing a boundary. Up to this point, this is an area that ordinary viewers can probably understand and relate to. But here, there is one important thing. You should not think too excessively that doing only this will solve everything perfectly. But you should also not think that it has no meaning at all. The people of the past believed that these everyday methods could help remove a light negative energy that had clung to a person from a funeral hall. But they did not believe that this alone ended everything. Because even if a person prepared and defended themselves in advance, an influence that could not be resolved might still remain. Then, in what kinds of situations did people suspect that this influence had grown deeper? When the negative energy and influence that followed from a place of death continued into real life, that was when the true horror was believed to begin. The reason people feared this phenomenon was that after returning from a funeral hall, and before the person even realized it, problems would slowly begin to pile up. It was not simply feeling a little strange. It was when truly unusual things, different from ordinary life, continued to happen. This is something I actually experienced. At a former workplace, there was something that happened to a junior colleague I cared about. One day, that colleague had to attend the funeral of a distant relative. The funeral hall was in a faraway region, and the relationship was not especially close. So the colleague hesitated and wondered whether they really had to go out of courtesy, or whether they should simply send condolence money and words of comfort. At the time, I thought of it as a common concern and did not take it seriously. And for a while, I forgot about it. But the strange changes began to build up after that. A few weeks later, that junior colleague suddenly collapsed in the office with dizziness and vomiting symptoms. I was nearby, so I supported them and went with them to the emergency room. The hospital ran tests, but no clear cause could be found. No one thought that this could be related to the funeral hall visit. That colleague had always been healthy and was still young. So we could only think of it as a temporary symptom caused by work stress or overwork. But that was the beginning. As that sudden health problem could not be medically resolved, it affected their work. They could no longer focus. Conflicts arose with superiors. Their evaluations became worse. And their relationships with people around them also began to fall apart, little by little. The hospital viewed it as panic disorder or a mental health issue and prescribed medication. But the situation continued in a strange way. I eventually consulted a well-known spiritual medium about matters related to the company. During that consultation, I came to mention the junior colleague. The person giving the consultation first told me to ask whether that colleague had recently visited a funeral hall. Only then did I belatedly remember that the colleague had once talked to me while hesitating over whether to go to a funeral hall or not. At that moment, I had the experience of thinking that this phenomenon might have been connected to an energy that followed from a place of death. There is another case. There was a head of a household who had returned from a funeral visit. He was the kind of person who was active in helping others. And on that particular day, he stayed unusually long and helped with many parts of the funeral procedure. After returning home, he did not say much. But the next day, he suddenly developed severe body aches. He thought it would pass within a day or two, but the fever lasted for a long time. He had cold sweats every night, and he said his back felt suffocated, as if someone were pressing down on it. But what was even stranger was what happened after that. Inside the home, he kept clashing with his family over insignificant words. A normally quiet child woke up crying every night. His wife said her heart was pounding for no reason. While driving, he almost got into a minor collision, and someone who normally never stumbled missed a step on the stairs. When such things overlap within a short period of time, the people of the past suspected that the negative influence had not remained with only one person, but had crossed over into the household itself. There is another case. A person who, after visiting a funeral, begins waking up at the same time every day. 2 in the morning. 3 in the morning. Their eyes open at almost the same time each night. And right before waking, they always dream of a hallway or a doorway. Someone is standing in front of the door. Something is trying to enter the room. Or the black clothing they saw at the funeral hall appears exactly as it was inside the dream. At first, they do not pay much attention to it. But if it continues for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, the person becomes exhausted. They may begin to live a different daily life, a different life from before. The person themselves may not know it, but someone watching the changes from outside begins to feel more and more certain. Something must have gone wrong that day. It feels like they brought something back that day. And the strongest fear was when one funeral seemed to call another. After holding one funeral, if a healthy family member developed a serious illness, or if another obituary came from a close family member, or if a sudden accident followed one after another, people feared this as a sign that death and misfortune were continuing in a chain. This is not simply a horror performance. In actual tradition and shamanic belief, such a flow where death continues after death was seen as one of the most avoided and worst possible flows. And the negative energy and influence following from a place of death was often connected to that kind of chain of misfortune, because people believed it did not end as one person's fatigue symptoms. They believed it could pull down the energy of the entire household. After visiting a funeral hall, when symptoms like these appeared, people believed that the negative energy and influence following from a place of death had entered deeply. And this became the point where people felt it had gone beyond light precautions or simple preparation. The problem is that people who do not know about this influence may not realize the cause of the problems that are happening. Just like the case of the junior colleague I mentioned earlier, when the situation was considered not ordinary or serious enough to go beyond the normal range, people sometimes tried to remove the impurity through rituals or shamanic rites performed by a spiritually powerful shaman or medium and return the person to their original life. These rituals to drive away the energy of death were not simply acts to ease fear. In folk belief and shamanic practice, they were considered procedures to detach the impure energy connected to a person and to release the impurity that had settled inside the home. When the body, dreams, the household, and the flow of luck all collapsed together, it was seen as one method to return everything back to its proper place. And people believed that if the spiritual medium was truly powerful, the effect could actually be felt. That is why, in some cases, people said not to simply endure it, not to hesitate, and to resolve it quickly. When it is shallow, it may be brushed off. But once it deepens, people believed that not just one person, but the entire household could be dragged along by impure energy and unseen presences. At this point, the negative energy and influence following from a place of death goes beyond an ordinary superstition of daily life. It is not a matter that ends with sprinkling salt once. It becomes a point that shows how much people feared the impurity of death affecting the lives of the living. The reason this negative energy and influence following from a place of death is more frightening than other kinds of horror is that it does not have a clear face like a ghost or a monster. Instead, the body reacts first. Sleep collapses first. The energy of the home turns downward first. And the person keeps looking back. The place I went that day. The moment I crossed that threshold. The thing I missed when I came home that day. Should I have stopped at a convenience store? Should I have passed through a crowded place? Should I not have gone straight home? Should I have washed my hands first, changed my clothes first, and cut it off at the doorway before entering? This energy of death is frightening because it makes people think of these things only after it is too late. Because it is a fear that is realized after everything has already begun. Most of the wisdom of our ancestors was not without reason. There were certainly many cases, and because people understood the reasons behind them, many things were passed down to later generations. Every person will one day end their life through death. A funeral visit and the act of offering comfort for death were not forbidden in themselves. Seeing off the final path of someone who was loved is still a duty of the living. However, because the place of that farewell was believed to be the boundary between the living and the dead, and because people believed that boundary could sometimes break down, they became more careful and they prepared more. And even the process after the funeral visit was considered just as important. It was to create one final boundary so that someone's death could not follow back into the home and space of the living and invade them. The negative energy and influence that follows from a funeral hall is not the name of one single ghost. It is an old record and an old fear of the energy and impurity left behind in the place where death had passed. Believed to arise when a person with weakened luck became connected to a place of death. The negative energy that follows from a place of death. Perhaps it was a fear of unseen presences, and at the same time, It may have been the name of the final boundary that the living had to protect until the very end.